The movie Sybil was a pop culture phenomenon that was instrumental in the creation of a new psychiatric condition, multiple personality disorder. It's still a popular subject for Hollywood, actually. The ABC program United States of Tara covers similar ground. Sybil, though, was in a league of its own. The book sold millions of copies, became an Emmy Award-winning movie and unleashed a wave of multiple personality cases. But as North America correspondent Jane Cowan reports, there are now suggestions the whole Sybil case was a fraud.
It felt like it wasn't me. It felt like a dreamy state.
For those who suffer from it, multiple personality disorder is a frightening and sometimes debilitating condition. But is it real?
All of a sudden, the person who's talking to you right now, I was just suddenly gone. I just wasn't there.
This is not a circus sideshow. It's not an exciting, fascinating corner of psychiatry. It's an experience that happens to people who've had to fight for their survival as children.
It's powerfully, scandalously hoaxy, I guess you could say.
The idea of multiple personalities burst into the popular imagination in the 70s with one word: Sybil.
No, you just collect yourself, young lady, or we'll be late for church.
It was almost like the Bible had come out again. Everybody was buying this book. 6 million copies of the book sold within a few years after it was first published. And people were, particularly young women and girls, were talking about this book and were obsessing about the book.
I can tell you. I'm not supposed to tell you. I can tell you.
The supposedly true story of a young woman possessed by 16 different personalities made for gripping drama. But soon it became more than entertainment.
Well, before the book was published in 1973, in the entire history of the world, there had been less than 80 documented cases of something resembling multiple personality disorder. Less than 80 cases. After the book came out, within a few years, there were thousands of cases, and interestingly, they cropped up almost exclusively in places where lots and lots of people were reading Sybil.
Now, nearly 40 years on, investigative journalist Debbie Nathan says she can prove the entire Sybil case was little more than elaborate fiction.
It's incredible to think that psychiatrists, psychologists, and all of us could have been fooled by this over-the-top story.
Using records unsealed at New York's John Jay College of Criminal Justice, including treatment notes, letters, tapes and diaries, Debbie Nathan has painstakingly pieced together what really happened.
You better say God is love real quick.
God is love.
Because God hates bad girls.
As the story goes, Sybil was tortured by a sadistic mother, a trauma so extreme it caused psychic splitting.
My name is Dr. Wilbur, by the way.
She was said to have repressed the memories until they were unearthed by the heroic ministrations of a compassionate psychiatrist, Dr. Cornelia Wilbur. In truth, the treatment looked more like this. In this grainy training film, a young Dr. Wilbur injects psychiatric patients with the barbiturate Sodium Pentathol.
So she thinks if she gives him this injection of barbiturates and then tells him, you don't have any reason to shake, that suggestion will keep him from shaking.
Although known as truth serum, the drug was later found to produce false memories. It was this World War II-era technique called Narcosynthesis therapy that Dr. Wilbur later used on Sybil.
She asked her patient leading questions while her patient was under the influence of a drug that creates fantasies. And that's really how these stories were generated, the stories of her mother's torture.
The myth was compounded when Dr. Cornelia Wilbur joined forces with another ambitious woman, magazine journalist Flora Schreiber, to write the book Sybil.
There were times when the women knew that they were making things up. There were times when they were very confused or naive. A suggestible, fantasy-prone woman, the patient would tell the therapist something and the therapist would naively believe it. the therapist might later tell the journalist, and the journalist would naively believe it.
Most of the people who have looked at this objectively have come to the belief that this was an enterprise in deception rather than an enterprise that helped and advanced our discipline.
Psychiatrists like Dr. Peter McHugh say not only the Sybil case, but the whole notion of multiple personalities is misguided.
I don't think they're frauds, don't get me wrong. I believe that they have been persuaded by their experience with the therapeutic world and other influential features that this is a disorder that makes sense to them, okay? And I believe it, by continuing it, they make invalids of themselves.
But psychiatrists like Dr. Jeffrey Smith still diagnose and treat patients with multiple personalities, or dissociative identity disorder as it's now called.
When you meet these people and you meet their different parts, it's not artificial, it's not strange, it's not physician-induced or therapist-induced. It's a way of coping with a really, really terrible situation.
Sculptor Robert Oxnam was diagnosed with 11 different personalities 20 years ago.
And I looked at him and I said, "You're kidding." I said, I saw that movie Sybil. I said, I'm not like Sybil. I'm not running around crazy. I'm sort of psychologically like Humpty Dumpty. I was trying to put myself back together again. It's almost like family therapy. You discover you have a family inside. This angry kid named Tommy, a witch, all of this happens in childhood. A witch that came out.
One thinks that if you are expressing yourself in this way, that it must mean that you have several personalities. The therapist believes that, begins asking the patient, can we separate those things out? Can we give them names? The patient wonders what to do and eventually does it. And then the doctor is convinced, or the therapist is convinced that the truth must be there because after all something came out, and the patient is relieved that the doctor has gotten what he or she is looking for, and before you know it, they're walking down the primrose path together.
You have no idea how much crazy is bouncing around that lopsided skull of yours.
While the doctors argue the idea of multiple personalities remains a fixture in American popular culture. And with thousands of Americans living with the diagnosis, unravelling fact from fiction is no less fraught than it was in the 70s.
I have a worry that when a case as prominent as Sybil is put into a deflated position as questioned, that it might lead people to believe that this doesn't exist. And this does exist. I've gone through a lifetime with it.
Jane Cowan reporting.